Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Michael Leiter. And Michael, hopefully I get your entire title here. So you're an adjunct professor at Acadia University. You're an honorary professor of organizational psychology at Deakin University. And you're also the co-author with a book with Christina Maslach. It's called The Burnout Challenge, Managing People's Relationships with Their Jobs, that is published on Harvard University Press. Did I get all of that?
You got all that right. I am very impressed. I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Oh, well, I am able to read, which is great, but I'm just so excited to chat with you, and very cool because, coast to coast, I'm in Vancouver. You're on the other side of the country, Nova Scotia. I'm just excited to learn more about you and learn more about what you do. So why don't you tell our listeners anything I might not have mentioned so far about who you are?
Oh, that does. Yeah, I think you've got that basically. You nailed it pretty well. I play Irish music on flute, so that's another thing you didn't mention. But that's part of my life.
That is one of the things I really wanted to know. So that's perfect. So
Okay.
also, I'll note that we've got a little bit of connectivity issues just for the video, but hopefully our listeners don't mind too much, or viewers don't mind too much. But I was just happy to see you. So let's start with the book. What had you want to write the book? Where did you get the idea? Where did you get the inspiration? And what was your journey? And then we'll go from there.
Okay, Christina Maslach and I have been doing research on burnout for many, many, many years. We started way back. I went to California on a sabbatical and worked with her at Berkeley for a year and did some studies. And then it just clicked. We started seeing this is a really interesting topic. It's got a lot of legs. It's going to be a part of work life for time to come, and we need to be figuring this out. So we thought we'd put things together. We've been working on this, throughout our careers, and we wanted a book that pulled together what were the major lessons that we had gained from doing this research over the years. And that's what the Burnout Challenge has turned out to be.
Cool. Obviously, coming out of COVID and the past couple of years where burnout and people issues have been, more pronounced or more prevalent, most recently quiet quitting and whatever else has probably come up since we record and publish this. But how have you seen, as somebody who's, a professor of organizational psychology, how have you seen burnout evolve? Was it easier when you could have a whiskey at your desk and it was totally acceptable? Like, what was the evolution of burnout in the workspace?
Well, people have had different ways. Yeah, work has always made demands on people. And I think what we found with defining this syndrome is that there is this collection of things that are really characteristic of people when they get sort of pushed a bit too far. And part of it is just feeling exhausted, and exhausted in a way so that you're tired before the workday even begins. Like if you're tired at the end of the workday, it just means you worked hard. But if you're tired before the day begins, it means that your way of looking after yourself, your way of just everything's out of balance at that point. That shouldn't happen. That happens maybe once in a while, but it shouldn't be a regular part of your life. So that kind of exhaustion is the problem. And then going along with that is this idea, I used to love this work and I can't stand it anymore. I can't, another customer, another patient, another student, I just can't. Having lost what was really the motivator that put it into that sort of distancing, cynicism, depersonalization, whatever, that goes along with being really exhausted from what you're doing. And then the third part, since along with those two things comes this discouragement. Like, I'm just not accomplishing anything worthwhile. I'm just spinning my wheels here. I should get out of this career as fast as I can. So that's this triumvirate, these three dimensions that really define the syndrome. And that's what we measure when we're doing surveys with people to find out how much of that's going on with you.
And I know that I imagine there's a couple of like environmental factors as well, but why would you say that these type of things are becoming more prevalent in the workforce? Is it happening more? Is it because the speed of things? Is it the technology makes it so you can never turn off, so you don't get unexhausted? What's driving burnout in 2022?
Sort of, all of the above. The thing about burnout is that it's sort of being driven in multiple kinds of ways. And I think partly it is different. It's more difficult for people to get some distance from their job. I mean, one, it's more and more important to people, both not only in terms of making a living, but also people's identity. A lot of work now for people, their values are really tied up in it. They're really trying to accomplish something. It makes a difference whether this thing is furthering what I think is important and really vital in the world, or whether I think I'm wasting my time. That people really want something that is meaningful out of their work. I think that, you can say, well, maybe they shouldn't, but they do. And it is part of it. And there's a lot of careers that give that opportunity. There's a lot of substance to a lot of things that people do these days in terms of communications and medicine and, research and ideas. It's really fascinating that way. And so when people bring that creativity, those aspirations to their work and find that they're thwarted, they just can't make it happen. It starts hitting those qualities of, it just takes away their energy, it takes away their enthusiasm. And I think there's just more of that going on. And, the pandemic had elements that aggravated that. But a lot of things that are going on at work life in terms of closely monitoring people and making all kinds of extraneous demands on people, that is all pushing that envelope as well.
It sounds to me somewhat of a double-edged sword that over, you can tell I'm relatively young in my career, and that on one hand, the opportunity to follow one's passion and to dig into something that you're super committed to provides a life or work life or career with a higher level of fulfillment, satisfaction, like on the hierarchy of needs, you really get to that like self-actualization to a deeper level. But on the flip side, it also demands more of you in a good way because you want to give it that extra. You want to put that 110%, which might be a greater lead to greater burnout through something more satisfying. Whereas if you had a career, all you did was, or your job was to fill packing peanuts and you were just satisfied because that was your job, you wouldn't get burnt out because you might not lean into it as much. Am I understanding what I think you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's very much, and I think, like university education has certainly been complicit in all this and saying, well, you should do what you believe in. You should do the work that really is important to you. So people, it gets beyond, working what you need to do just to pay the bills and be there. People are looking for something more. And one could argue that that's a reasonable expectation. Why shouldn't work life be designed so people can do that while also, providing the basic tasks that need to get done for the job, but have that capacity for people to reach beyond that. And I think that's a lot of ways of workplaces are put together. Just it doesn't allow so much for all of that. It gets too constrained on people.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine also the function of the evolution of opportunities. If you're in Nova Scotia and you can only work in Nova Scotia 20, 30 years ago, you were kind of limited to the jobs that were available. Now, the opportunity to work anywhere in any field is boundless. And so the propensity and availability for somebody to work in a career that they want to work in versus the job that's available, a 15-minute drive from their house has also changed the dynamic of employers or employees, but also employers. Thoughts on that?
I think that's very much happening. I think the Great Resignation, it was really the great job shift. And a lot of people were leaving lines of work that just simply weren't doing it for them and looking for those opportunities that do. And the people who did that shift are the people who really got, that are up to something. There's people with energy, people with aspirations, actually the kind of people that you want to hire and that have been, then you get into those positions which have more latitude. And people are finding their feet in it and beginning to really get things going. I'm not convinced as much as the quiet quitting. I'm not sure that's as much of a real thing. You saw real data about people leaving jobs, like there was data on that. I think the quiet quitting is sort of an idea, but I think very few people are going to really be content with a world where they're doing the absolute minimum and seeing if they can skim by on that. One, I think things are monitored a bit too closely to keep skimming by for very long. And secondly, it's sort of boring.
Yeah. You don't want to be doing, which goes to that, like, hey, if you're doing the thing that you want, why would you give the minimum just because you're paid that?
Yeah.
Let me maybe switch gears a little bit, because it's interesting, like, the great job shift. And we've talked primarily about employees, so the kind of demand or supply side, I suppose. But if we look at managers and people that are impacting that. So I know that the burnout risks, what you had mentioned in the book, a couple things: insufficient rewards, socially toxic workspace community, absence of fairness, and values conflict.
Yeah.
And a lot of those are not, in fact, driven by the employees, but typically driven by managers and owners. So
Yes.
what is the role that managers, owners, CEOs, et cetera, play in that level of burnout at the individual?
Right. I think it's a big part, because the way that we look at it is that burnout results from a breakdown in the relationship between the person and the workplace and how they run into it. So the problem's not something deep within people like a mental illness or something like, it's not like that at all. It's a relationship problem between a person and their workplace. And some of that is relationships with specific individuals, particularly their supervisors or whatever in the workplace. What you find when we do these surveys that cover those 6 areas of work life is that burnout correlates with everything, whatever you're looking at. If you ask people about the parking availability, it will correlate with the burnout scale. Everything correlates with the burnout scale, because it goes to a core of how people are feeling and how they perceive the world. But what that means that doesn't mean, well, you've got to change everything, because what it does mean is you can change whatever you change is probably going to be a good idea. It's probably going to help people out. And so the question we look at is not what is the most powerful thing related to burnout, because that's probably workload. And often there's few options for really reducing people's workload. That isn't the most available thing for a manager to change. But these other aspects, the question is, what can you change? And can you change a person's sense of control? Can you really get a person to have a better sense of feeling of control over when they do their work, how they do the work, with whom they do their work? Can you increase control? Or can you improve community? That's something I've worked on a lot. We've sort of developed an intervention process that's I liken to doing family therapy with work groups. You go in and you find that there are strained relationships. They're not deadly or anything. It's just some people, they're feeling just lonely. They're feeling unsupported. People are just taking them for granted. They say good morning and nobody really responds in any kind of cheerful way. People really want to belong to a work group that cherishes them. They really do. They want to be valued. I want these people to like me. That's who I'm spending my days with. And so what you find is that you don't have to eliminate all the little rudenesses. People will be rude and inconsiderate and self-absorbed some of the time, not just life. But you can make the positive interactions surrounding that to be much more prevalent. And if you can improve that community and move people away from being rude and towards being more appreciative and acknowledging of each other, that's going to push people away from burnout and hold them over towards being more engaged in their work. Because that social dynamic is very powerful. People who are experiencing burnout, we ask them, what's your relationships with other people? And they're saying, people are rude to me all the time. Some people are just really bullying me. But they're also saying, and I'm pretty rude to other people too, because I don't have any energy to put up with these idiots. Okay, so you find that you end up with a social dynamic when people are really feeling burnt out that's really strained, both giving and receiving. If you can go in and change that, move things for the better, that's another approach that you could use that would, but all those have to be real interventions. You can't just pretend to give people more control over their work and not really. People are smart enough to know when they have that. You've got to make any of those areas of work-life, values, fairness, rewards, any of those, if you work on any of those, they're going to have a beneficial effect. Now, some of them are going to be more powerful in one setting than another, but you've got all these options, and you got to know your people. You got to give your frontline supervisors the capacity to make some adjustments with people. You can't say everybody's got to be treated exactly the same. That's not going to get you very far. They've got to have the capacity to say, okay, we can come up with a better solution for you about how you do your work in this kind of setting. That kind of idea. And then you can start getting to where these more people and more diverse kind of workforce can find good relationships with their workplace rather than being really strained and a mismatch between what they're aspiring to and what's available to them.
That's so. First of all, if you, as you're listening, review the last like 5 minutes and play that like 2 or 3 times, no matter where you're at in your organization. There was some real gold in there. Mike, I'll try to encapsulate some of that. So one of us, at the heart of it, because I always like looking at the root cause, it's a breakdown between the relationship between the workplace, and the individual. So start there, because the work itself on its own might not be the thing, but it's the workplace, the work, and the individual. I find that it's the perception and the expectation, potentially a breakdown there, potentially a breakdown with the value drivers. But at the end of it, it could be the workload, but you can't always impact the workload. Yes, but not always, because there's always work to be done. Change, sense of control, sense of community, feeling valued is critical to being able to do that. And then also being able to measure some or many of those things, and you didn't say this explicitly, on a scale to see how you're doing, and then making sure that the people are empowered to make changes towards that so that they can actually support what that is. Did I capture some, if not most of it?
You captured it really well. And Christina Maslick and I major focus in our career has been developing measures so that people can put this thing together, figure out how you can use these measures to not only identify, well, who's on the burnout end, but who's on the positive end and what's going on with that. And then some of the things that are in between. Like one of the distinctions that we think that's very important is between people who are burned out, who are exhausted and cynical and discouraged, and contrast those with people who are just exhausted. They're just, but they love their work and they think they're accomplishing great things, but they're just exhausted because they don't have enough support or putting in too many, whatever, for whatever reason. That often gets mislabeled as burnout, but it's a much simpler, much more straightforward problem to address than addressing people who are not only exhausted, but they're utterly cynical and they're utterly discouraged. It's really hard to reach them. People who are overworked, and that's it, just exhausted, they've got an answer. Let's deal with this workload issue. Let's deal with it. Let's, whatever we got to do, let's do. That's a much more straightforward problem. It is definitely solvable. And it can address a lot of people in today's work world that are feeling overextended in that way.
Yeah, I like that. One of the things that, for those of you that have been listening to the podcast for a long time, you know that the reason why I like doing strategic planning is because if you have a clear vision of where the company goes and the team is working well and aligned, it means you're going to have a happier work. If you have a happier work, you're going to have a happier home. If you have a happier home, you're going to have a happier community. And so strategic planning is our way of changing the world. So Michael, it sounds like that I'm not just making stuff up, that there is alignment between having happy workplace, a happy home, and a happy community. And that way you're not a jerk to everybody you walk by. Can't guarantee it, but decrease the likelihood.
Absolutely. And being kind right there at the beginning, at the middle of it. Yes.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you had mentioned, again, for our leaders, because one of the things that come up and you hear about it probably because it's sexy or newsworthy, where you hear about like toxic workplaces, but it's like the thing you can do is remove the toxin. And you might be the toxin in your own workplace, but if you don't remove that thing from the environment, it's just going to make the terrible environment for everybody. And that's going to contribute to the burnout. That's going to contribute to people shifting out of their jobs. Michael, has your research explicitly or anecdotally found the same thing?
It definitely found the same thing. And we also found that, you can remove, but even better, if you can turn a person around, you can just actually, and that's what we do, when we're doing these groups with workplaces, getting across to people that, this strategy that you're using that's really annoying people, and you don't have to do that. And we can come up together, work out better ways of doing that. We've done a lot where you get a work group where you look at the survey and you find out actually the person the group has the most difficulty with is actually the supervisor. When we find that, we take the supervisor out and do coaching with them for a while and say, look, you're going to go anywhere with this supervisor thing. These days, you can't have everybody hating you. You've got to actually get across to your people, and you can train them, and people will respond to that. You can, and then put them with the group and do a whole group process to take things forward. I think improving those relationships is one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader within a workplace.
Well, it's just so one of the ahas for me, because I sometimes see like, hey, if you have a person who's toxic, for lack of a better word, and is not contributing to the environment, but were they like that before? Or was the other factors like did they become burnt out? Did they become disengaged? And they are now then taking it out on everybody else. And so really, again, getting to the source of that is key. Michael, I think there's so much to go on this, but I think just, again, there's some really great pieces here that our listeners can take in to just assess their workplaces and make really tangible steps to make the lives of their employees and their people different and better. And I just really appreciate you for sharing today. Where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work? Where can they, I don't know, take one of your classes in Australia if they're around? What's the best way to get engaged?
Best way to get engaged? Well, I have a website, mpleiter.com. And so that is available, and they can also buy the book, which is called Burnout Challenge, and it's coming out in a couple of weeks.
Excellent. It'll be out by the time the episode is published, which is exciting. So we'll make sure we put a link in there. And then Leiter spelled Leiter. So make sure that we get the right spelling there. So Michael, thank you again. It's been such a pleasure. And I just appreciate the time. It's been, I learned a lot today, and I think our listeners did too. So thank you so much for the time.
Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you today. It's just great.
Absolutely. So folks, thank you to my guest, Michael Leiter, who's the author of The Burnout Challenge, Managing People's Relationships with Their Jobs. And for me, and did tons of podcasts, talked to a lot of CEOs in coaching and on this show. And one of the biggest things is looking at the relationship between the work, the person, and the workplace. And if you are committed to creating a great place, look at people's relationship within it and make sure that you have the facts and factors that support them. So thank you again, Michael, to my guest. My name is Anthony Taylor. This has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you being here. And I'll see you next time.